And I want to welcome everyone. So hello and welcome. I'm Daniel Jordan from the Center of Teaching and Learning Excellence. And today we're happy to welcome Dr. Catherine Duncan, who's here to discuss mindful teaching. If you have any questions, feel free to drop those into the chat. We'll be monitoring that and answering those questions as they come in. And for now, I'll turn it over to Dr. Duncan. The floor is all yours.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share screen. I do have a PowerPoint for us. Okay, so mindful teaching, and I wanted to just kind of set up where this was coming from and to not present myself as an expert, but as a colleague who got inspired. So why mindful teaching? I think I could trace its roots back to the fall of 2013 when I taught my first Harry Potter course, and it was magical. Sorry, I have to say it. And I asked myself, what could I take from this experience moving forward? It wasn't, I can teach Harry Potter every single semester, and content had a lot to do with it. But I realized that a lot of what was happening in that classroom had to do with different style of teaching than I had ever really tried before. And I kind of wanted to bring some of that forward with me in future classes. Another way that this has come to me is through my research. I've written a book, Jane Austen and the Buddha, Teachers of Enlightenment. It's forthcoming. It actually should be out, I think, in a couple of weeks. So that meant a lot of research on mindfulness as being such a major component of Buddhism. So we should always have our definitions in place. This is from Jon Kabat-Zinn. Mindfulness is a purposeful way of paying attention to the present moment, and then in italics, without judgment. So just to experience what you're experiencing without evaluating it, without labeling it as good or bad, it just is what it is. That's what mindfulness is. Be here now without judgment. So that's what we're going to do. So one of the things that I've promised is that we're going to do a little practice of our own. We have to practice our own mindfulness if we want to be able to bring that into our classrooms. So we're going to try some things along the way. I had the opportunity as part of the research on this book and during a sabbatical to participate in a retreat at a Buddhist monastery, and I'm not making it up, Mississippi. And it was run by Thich Nhat Hanh's order. And one of the things that Thich Nhat Hanh emphasizes is we have to stop, we have to pause, we have to get back in touch with the present moment, because often our head is over here, our body's entirely somewhere else. So we're going to try that right now. So whenever a bell is heard at the monastery, it doesn't matter what you're doing, you stop and you breathe 3 times, just a nice cleansing 3 breaths. So we're going to do that now. Yeah, and this was my souvenir for myself from my retreat. Okay. So when you hear the bell, breathe 3 times. And you might have heard a little cat meow in there too. My cat liked that mindfulness moment. Okay, so mindfulness has gotten a lot of attention. You can find magazine covers as you're checking out from the grocery store. You see the blissed out face of this mindfulness special edition from Time. But again, keep in mind that mindfulness is not necessarily blissing out. Mindfulness is just being in the moment. Not every moment in our lives is going to be blissful. So modern mindfulness is not calmness, because you're not calm 24/7. You can be present, but sometimes you're feeling anxious. Sometimes you're feeling angry, and you have to be mindful to that too. It's not religious. It's certainly part of a lot of religious traditions. As I said, I've done my research on Buddhism. It's a central part of that, but it's entirely secular. It's being here now, present moment without judgment. So it is absolutely not the absence of thoughts, because if you are like me, you are probably thinking a lot. I'm a classic overthinker myself. So it's not the absence of thoughts. So I've had people say to me, oh, I can't meditate. because my brain is still going. I'm like, well, that doesn't mean you're not meditating. It just means that you're present to the fact that your brain is still going. So why do we need mindfulness? I had a yoga teacher actually say to me once that the mind is a wonderful servant and a terrible master. So we need to be in touch with our minds instead of our minds running us all around in circles all the time. So let's try another practice. Now, this is obviously the traditional meditation pose. That is not necessary when you're doing meditation at all. It is necessary to sit up straight, nice and tall. You really do need to have a nice straight spine. You want to have both of your feet planted on the floor. You can take your hands and just rest them in your lap. And all meditation is doing in this form of meditation is paying attention to your breath. So don't obsess over it. Don't regulate it. Just pay attention to it. That's all you're doing. And if your mind wanders, that's okay. There's no problem with that. It doesn't mean you're not meditating. Okay, so we're going to give it a try. I'm just going to use my meditation app. I use the Insight app, and we're just going to do a very, very short meditation. You're going to hear a bell 10 seconds in to kind of get yourself settled. When you hear the second bell, it means we're done. And apologies if advance during this meditation, that's actually when the dog starts to bark. I'm just saying. Okay. Now, no one has to, but would anybody like to share what their experience was like? Okay, you don't have to. Students, when I have done meditation with them in the classroom, always just this short cycle as well, sometimes report that they're uncomfortable with silence. Our students tend not to be used to silence. They're inundated with sound wherever they go, wearing their AirPods, etc. But that's not a problem. Again, when I'm meditating, I typically don't look like this. This is what I tend to look like, this guy. So the Buddhists talk about the monkey mind. that there's always this chattering going on in the head. For me, I have a colony of monkeys in my head. They're talking all the time. When I first decided to write this book, I decided to go old school. I went to Cayo Costa to do primitive camping in this cabin with no electricity. And I was there for maybe one full day when I said, shut up. I was speaking to myself, not very kindly. Because my brain was just not used to this quiet, right? And that's fine. Again, that's just how some of our brains work. And there's not a problem with that unless we're not aware and we're letting the monkeys take charge. So why is this? Well, a lot of it has to do with evolution, how we're built. Our brains were evolved so that we would survive as a species and not to make us happy. All of this happened in the Pleistocene era, which means it happened a long time ago, and it all is operating still at an unconscious level. But a really important psychological adaptation that evolution gave to us as a gift is anxiety. If we had not been anxious back in the Pleistocene era, we would not have survived as a species. So anxiety is important and it can be helpful. The problem is that we don't know how to regulate it sometimes anymore. And we struggle to recognize that we're no longer in kind of a life or death situation. If back in the Pleistocene era, in this small group of people our ancestors lived with, they had annoyed somebody and been kicked out of that organization, right? They would literally die. So that's why we have social anxiety, right? We worry a lot about how people think about us. And this sort of primitive part of our brain doesn't get that it only feels like we're going to die. We're not actually going to die if we get rejected. So mindfulness can help us get in touch with anxiety and understand when it's appropriate and when it might be problematic. Anxiety is probably the #1 mental health concern that we have right now, especially with our students. So here's another technique, and I'm going to let Andrew Weil explain it to you himself.
When Nutrisystem created their new partner plan, we thought that sounds perfect for us.
It was a really good opportunity for us to be supportive of each other and to motivate each other.
The 4-7-8 breath that I teach is the most powerful relaxation method that I've discovered. It's very simple, requires no equipment, takes very little time, costs nothing. And it is a practice. It's something that you have to do regularly. So in this technique, you breathe in through your nose quietly to a count of 4, hold your breath for a count of 7, and then blow air out through your mouth audibly and forcefully. And you do this for a total of 4 breath cycles.
So interrupt for just a second to say, I would encourage you to participate when he does this and not just watch him do it.
I'm going to show you what this looks like. And that's all. It's a bit hard for me to come back and talk to you after I do that because this produces a very pleasant altered state of consciousness that I'd rather stay in. You may not get that the first time you try it, but it's a reward of practicing this. And this is a practice. You must do this at least twice a day. So that 4 breath cycles at least twice a day. After a month, if you're comfortable with it, you can increase to 8 breath cycles each time you do it, but that's the absolute maximum. You can do it more frequently than twice a day, but never more than 4 or 8 breath cycles at one time. It may take 4 to 6 weeks before you notice physiological changes from this, but over time, practicing this will lower heart rate, lower blood pressure, improve digestion, improve circulation. It promotes sleep if you get up in the middle of the night for any reason. It is the most effective anti-anxiety technique that I've found. I've taught it to patients with the most extreme forms of panic disorder who eventually brought that under control just relying on this breathing technique. So please practice it, do it regularly, and I think you'll be very pleased with the results.
Okay, so that's another technique. You can use these techniques, in your classroom. You can use the bell technique just to stop and say, okay, take a minute and come back here and let's be together. You can do quick meditations and you can do 4-7-8 breathing. Of course, currently it is trickier because of the pandemic. So yesterday I took my students outside and we took off our masks and I said, don't stand near each other. And we made a really big circle and we did some 4-7-8 breathing before we went in and read some poetry together. And they said that they appreciated that. Okay, so it's not only evolution that presents a problem, it's actually our education system, according to Ellen Langer, who is a social psychologist who's been studying mindfulness since the 70s and from a purely scientific perspective. So she argues that from kindergarten on, the focus of school is usually on goals rather on the process by which they are achieved. This single-minded pursuit of one outcome or another, from tying shoelaces to getting into Harvard, makes it difficult to have a mindful attitude about life. The style of education that concentrates on outcomes generally also presents facts unconditionally. This approach encourages mindlessness. If something is presented as an accepted truth, alternative ways of thinking do not even come up for consideration. Such a single-minded way of viewing the world can generalize to virtually everything that we do. So in other words, we've got evolution over here, but we also, according to Langer, have an education system that has trained us to be mindless, to not be in the moment, but to always be approaching things through a certain lens, through certain concepts. So Langer has another really great suggestion for a mindful practice so that you can try now. She suggests that you just look around in a room that you're probably familiar with and that you're in frequently right now and notice 5 things in the room without judgment. It has to be without judgment. If I were to do it right this second, I might notice that my floor needs vacuuming. I might be mad at myself for it. So without judgment, okay? So just look around and see what are 5 things that maybe you don't pay attention to. So what this does is it puts us in the room that we're actually in. When we frequently inhabit the same space, which our students do, right? They go into that classroom, they sit in the same seat habitually, they do the same things habitually. It makes them aware of where they actually are. So another thing that you can try sometime, if you would like, Ellen Langer also says you can take this practice and do it with someone that you spend time with, that you care about, and that actually will improve your relationship, because the person that you're actually really noticing is going to feel noticed and therefore cherished, because you've taken the time and energy to do that. A variation on this Langer idea is the rainbow. So another thing that you can do is look around you and find one thing in the room for each of the colors of the rainbow. And again, it's just a way to get you in the space that you're actually occupying. So another problem we have that can make us not mindful is culture and capitalism. We don't live in a particularly mindful time period or society. We're taught pretty early on that we should avoid suffering. We can't avoid suffering entirely, but we're told that we should try, and we should buy these various products in order to make sure that we do. And we're also inundated with technology just all the time, and we're told to multitask. I've had students say to me that when they graduate and go on job interviews, they're asked, can you multitask? And the reason they've said that to me is because I've explained to them that the psychological research says we actually can't. Not really, not successfully, but we're expected to. So there's always something that's trying to grab our attention instead of us giving ourselves that space to just kind of let our thoughts flow a little bit. I tell my students that one of the things that I do as a mindful practice is that I run without music. And they're appalled by this idea that I would want to do that. And then when I tell them that when I'm training for a marathon, that means I would be running maybe 4 hours without music. And then they just think I'm crazy, and I think they're concerned for me. But I tell them that is the space where I get good ideas. That is the space where I will suddenly have an aha moment, because it's that time and that silence that will do that for me. So the mindfulness practice develops self-awareness, emotional stability, impulse control, improved focus, and certainly we want that in the classroom, is that improved focus. It makes us more comfortable with risk-taking, because again, we're not being mastered by the mind, so we recognize that it's okay to fail. In fact, it's going to be inevitable to fail, and when we do, it's just part of life that we do, and nothing horrible will happen. It allows us to welcome change, because we recognize that risk-taking, again, can be beneficial to us. And then that makes us less fearful of failure. So where does this help us really, particularly in our current situation? A Washington Post article came out very recently talking about mental health and COVID. It cited a 2020 CDC survey that found 25% of adults that they surveyed, age 18 to 25, our population on the university campus, had seriously considered suicide. So a quarter had seriously considered suicide in 2020, with the extra pressure of dealing with COVID, because already there's a mental health crisis. So adding in this extra pressure has been too much for a lot of our students. In that same article, they cite a study from the Center for Collegiate Mental Health at Penn State that looked at data from the fall 2020. It was collected from 137 counseling centers that had been visited in total by 43,000 college students. Those findings are that 72% of the students report that the pandemic negatively affected their mental health. 68% lost motivation or focus, and 67% reported loneliness and isolation. So this is where our students are. I think from my experience, just this semester, I think our students fit this description as well. I've seen a lot of concerning behavior in students reaching out to me. So some other things that we can do personally to practice mindfulness, because again, we really have to practice this ourselves to bring that into the classroom, I feel. Mindful movement, sometimes we're not maybe as comfortable with sitting and doing quiet meditation. So you can use mindful movement. I run, like I said, and for me, that's a mindfulness practice, because I'm letting the thoughts just kind of flow through. I'm catching when I'm getting caught by a thought, when it's sticky. I pay attention to the environment around me. I'm very lucky about these gorgeous oak trees and lots of wildlife and gorgeous birds. Yoga is fantastic, because yoga concentrates on breath and is really a mindfulness practice, as is Tai Chi. Tai Chi has a lot of movements in it, so you can also try Qigong, 8 pieces of brocade, something like that, which is a little shorter. And then Thich Nhat Hanh is a big proponent of walking meditation. So the idea being, of course, that we're walking all the time, but we're generally not paying attention when we're walking. So walking meditation means that you're really going deliberately and paying attention to each step, feeling your foot as it hits the ground. You can time your breath with that as well. You can inhale for 3, exhale for 5. But walking meditation is great. There's even the suggestion that you can designate a part of your house as you're walking through your house. I don't know about you, but I'm always rushing back and forth. I need to get this, I need to get that, sometimes forgetting what I'm supposed to get because I'm not being mindful. So you can pick, I get to the hallway door and I'm going to stop and I'm going to walk mindfully down my hallway. Anything that's just a little catch, just to catch you in that moment and bring you back into the present. You can use focused activity. So when I have had students say, I don't have time for any of this. Well, I point out to them that they can do the 4-7-8 breathing, and it would take approximately 3 minutes of their day. There's that. But also you can just do any activity mindfully. You can wash dishes. Thich Nhat Hanh is a big proponent of washing the dishes mindfully. I'm going to confess I don't do that one because I hate washing dishes. So I usually got a podcast going or something. But absolutely, when you're washing the dishes, you're only washing the dishes, or whatever that chore might be, whatever that thing is that you're doing. You don't do anything else. You don't read at the same time. You don't listen to anything at the same time. You just engage in that one activity while you're doing it. Coloring. All those adult coloring books, it's not marketing. There's actual research that shows that if you color mindfully, again, not in front of your TV or listening to a podcast, it has the same benefits as traditional meditation. So a coloring book with some nice pencils is a great way to go about practicing mindfulness. Mindful eating is very good for us, obviously. This is also something that I have practiced in the past with the students. I brought the little tiny oranges, little honeys, and it's a great one to use because it's very tactile as well. So this is something you can do. There's another practice where you can use a raisin and, just peeling it, enjoying the scent of it, not talking, not watching or listening to anything, and really enjoying every single bite of something that you're eating. Journaling is great because, again, that allows for a moment of reflection. So taking time to just write out, and then you're able to kind of see patterns and understand, like, this is what's making me anxious. This is what pulls me away from my mindfulness. Again, no multitasking. We're all going to multitask sometimes. That's just a reality of our modern day lives. But you can set aside some time or set aside some things that you're going to do during the day and just promise yourself that you're not going to multitask. And of course, then with more focus, right, we get those things actually done more quickly. We all need to unplug as we sit here on Zoom together. Technology is great, but sometimes we really all do need to just to unplug. That's all there is to it. We have to just get away from all of the technology intruding on our lives. And then you knew I was going to say this because I'm an English professor, but I have the research to support that you really should read a good book, but with attention. MRIs are the coolest things because they've gotten so many interesting research studies done with MRIs. So they put some grad students, of course, into an MRI, and they had them read Jane Austen, Mansfield Park, and they had them just kind of reading casually, and then they had them reading with real attention, right? Really pay attention to what you're reading here. And what they found is that the parts of the brain lit up as if the person were actually performing the task. So when you are reading a Jane Austen novel and there's that inevitable dancing or that inevitable walking, if you are really thoroughly in that book, reading carefully, the parts of your brain that would light up while you were dancing or while you were walking will light up. It's as if you are living that experience. So there's a whole practice called bibliotherapy. We have a really cool book in our library called The Novel Cure, which is an example of it if you're interested in more. But it's a practice of prescribing books to people who are perhaps having some just emotional difficulties, mental health problems, and kind of understanding where they are and what they're struggling with, what they like to read, and then saying, this is a book that will help you. And it helps because then the person sees that they're not in isolation. There is someone else who has this same problem, and here are some possible solutions. And because of that lighting up of our brain, it doesn't matter that the someone else is fictional. The person feels less lonely, essentially. I'm not plugging myself. You can ignore the next comment, but I've been blogging for a little over a year now, mindfulduncan.com. And I just started a 6-week series last Saturday, post every Saturday on bibliotherapy because of my students asked me, what are the classics we're supposed to be reading? So I said, okay, I'm going to write this for you guys. I'm writing one on Saturday about the difficulty of making decisions and what should you read from classical British literature to help you with making decisions. So those are all things we can do for ourselves, some of which translate very easily over into the classroom. There's some things that I would suggest specifically for the classroom, and they're all meant to break habit energy. As I said, like when we were talking about looking for those things in your room that breaks habit energy, we tend to react habitually. So we really want to kind of wake up our students and get them into that room with us and paying attention to what we're doing in that very moment. Sometimes I try quick field trips. As I said yesterday, we just stepped out of the classroom. I mean, it took away some classroom time, yes, but less than 5 minutes. And then once we got back inside, everybody's more present and the time together is more beneficial to everyone. We were reading a Jane Austen novel in that same class, and I pointed out, hey, there's always walking in Jane Austen. What if instead of staying in the classroom, let's take a short walk, and you guys get in pairs and talk to each other about this particular scene character, and let's just have a little class discussion, because we do that all the time, right? We tell students, like, talk to each other for a little bit and then we'll share with the class. So like, let's pretend that we're, Jane Austen characters, and we'll do that while we're walking, just to again, break that habitual response. More unusual assignments. I think going back to what Ellen Langer was saying about, the kind of rote learning that our students have grown up with. Throw something at them that they're not used to. Have them do something that is not typical, and see how they respond to that. It can freak them out a little bit, to be honest with you, because they're like, wait, this is not what I'm used to doing. But I think it's a good opportunity to try something different. So for example, I'm an English professor, I still have them write, obviously, but I try to give them opportunities for creativity. So in the monster class that I'm teaching this semester, I decided instead of a third essay for that class, that they have to pitch a movie adaptation idea. And so that has to include a little bit of like a 6-block drawing. And I said stick figures are fine. So that they have to take all of the material we've talked about all semester and what it means to be a monster, and they can pick their monster. But then I want them to pitch to us as if we're movie producers. This is my idea for a vampire movie or a zombie movie. Pausing to reflect. Again, you could just set a bell, a timer, halfway through your class and say, okay, everybody just take a minute to breathe. Just come back here to where we are. Or you can pause and say, okay, everybody just take a minute now and just write some stuff down, and just write down what you're thinking. Don't look at it. Don't collect it from them. Let them write. I am starving and I wished I hadn't signed up for a class during lunch. But have them come back, to where they are, or you can give them, a more specific prompt. Okay, so what is a question you have right now? And I think that's a really good way to go about it, because our students, I feel like, struggle to come up with questions, really. And coming up with a question is a really good critical thinking exercise. Okay, I know this will sound ridiculous, but show them a funny video with baby animals. There is also scientific, psychological study proof that when we watch baby animals being cute, we perform better on tasks. I guess it just makes us happy. And then movement. Every now and then I've just said to students, I'm looking out at them and, they look like zombies. And I'm like, just get up for a minute, get up out of your chair, just do a stretch. And they all kind of look at me funny, and then they'll do it. And then some of them look self-conscious, but I think they are, then afterwards you can tell their energy is better. So again, just something to wake everybody up and get them out of their habit energy really helps. Now, in the PowerPoint, which I will happily share with Cedal, and you can maybe have it available to people. I put together some resources for us. You'll notice everybody is extremely clever in their titling. I started putting this together and I'm like, wait, they all have the same title. That's okay. So these are specific to higher education. This one I thought was interesting because it has little short paragraphs from faculty in different disciplines talking about how they've used mindfulness. So that might be useful. This is a blog talking in general about how we can bring mindfulness into the classroom. And then this last one actually has some specific practices. So if you scroll all the way down, and what's cool about it is that they're categorized by time. So you could do this in 30 seconds. If you have 5 minutes, you could do this. So I thought that might be handy. And then these are just some resources that are not just specific to higher education, but had some really good information. Any of those just have, again, some suggestions and some more research. And then I ran across this today, so I just put it in here. I just thought it was super interesting based on Ellen Langer's research. There was an article in the Washington Post magazine, a crusade to end grading in high schools. And it was all about this guy who was principal of a private school who has gotten together this coalition of schools, and they've come together to basically end grading because he saw those same sorts of problems with education where everything was only about evaluation and everybody was only ever thinking about grades and end products. And he said, well, we can teach all of these topics and we can do it in such a way where the students are engaged with, how can I use science to figure out ways to deal with climate change, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, it's just an interesting read if you want to look at it. These are my sources that I directly cited. And then I guess if I'm honest, we would have my multi-page works cited from the book. So I didn't inundate the sources page with that, but I've just read a lot. It took me like 6 years to write this book, so I've read a lot. And do you have any questions? And tell me, please, what cool ideas that you have.
Catherine, I'm curious, how often do you incorporate mindfulness practices into your classes?
It's not sort of like a thing where I have it regularly scheduled, I suppose. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I'm going to do it on this day or this time. I think I let it more happen organically and naturally. Often it's tied to kind of, what we're doing for that day. The monster class I sent on a field trip a few weeks ago because we were reading Coraline. I don't know if anybody's ever read Neil Gaiman's Coraline. It's a great book, movie too. And she calls herself an explorer. She's a kid. So I said, okay, go off in your groups. I have them in monster groups and explore. And you have 10 minutes and then you come back. So it's not something I would do. That's something that was tied to a specific idea. Or in my class, we just read the Guernsey Literary Potato Peel Pie Society, which is an epistolary novel. So I said, okay, I brought you the materials. I want you all to write a letter to somebody, and I'm going to mail it for you. And just the exercise of writing the letter was really interesting for them because some of them had never written a letter.
Wow.
Catherine, I have a question. So for example, we all understand to be creative, you need to have a certain level of confidence in your language skills. So I'm always curious how my bridge students are doing in classes like that. Can they actually express their thoughts clearly? Can they allow themselves to be creative, or their less than perfect language skills are hindering their creativity? So do you have any experience with international students? How do they function in that kind of environment?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think I have a direct answer in terms of how it would be immediately applicable to what you're saying with international students. Like, I can't think of a specific example that way, but I think when you're doing the creativity exercises, you can get away from language. which is why it's useful. So, you know, for example, again, with the little field trip kind of thing, right? That's something anybody can do and feel comfortable with. Or the kind of the movie adaptation thing as well. They're able to draw. For my pirate class that I did in the spring of 2020, their final project was to draw a treasure map.
Mhm.
And so, again, I don't evaluate them on their artistic ability, but they all drew me a treasure map, and it had to include all of the things that we had read. I said, go ahead and include in there that we ended up online, you know, and so they were able to use just a different part of their brain and a different skill set that way. I don't know if that answers your question, sorry.
Yeah, you did.
Okay.
It's just in general, are they comfortable in this type of environment, or because they're very afraid to act stupid or look stupid? That's what they say. They say, oh, I'd rather not do that. I don't want to look
But
stupid.
that's all of them. That's all of them. I'm sure it's emphasized for the international students. I can totally see that. But really, I would say the vast majority of our students feel that way, that they're self-conscious and they're afraid of saying the wrong thing, et cetera. So you will get in that Harry Potter class that I started with, that class was just the community that was formed and the support that everybody offered each other. And there was one student in there who was uncomfortable. Everybody else was just, we are at Hogwarts, right? And the other student was just, I just thought I was going to read Harry Potter, you know? So that is a fact. You're right about that there can be some discomfort with doing something non-traditional. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay, good to know. Thank you.
When you're doing the 4-7-8, should you be able to get to a point where you're not thinking about the list you have to get done? I mean, are you supposed to be at a point where you're not thinking about anything and kind of relaxing?
So the 4-7-8 is really less about controlling the thought process at all. The 4-7-8 is literally a physiological response. It's really, the breath is so important. I mean, a lot of our anxiety is because we start to get anxious and then we start breathing very shallow. And then that makes us more anxious because we're not getting enough oxygen. And then that's what can eventually lead somebody to have an anxiety attack or a panic attack or something like that. But the 4-7-8 breathing is 100% about physiologically kind of flushing out the system and really giving yourself oxygen. My thinking rarely stops. I mean, I'm not joking when I say that I have that whole colony of monkeys living in my head. I felt so much better that one of the Buddhist nuns that I just think is amazing, that I have read a lot of, Pema Chodron. She's in her 80s and, she's incredible. And she confessed, she's like, yeah, I have a monkey mind. I mean, here's this woman who's devoted her entire life, right, to monasticism, and she still struggles with sitting down and meditating and not having her mind going crazy. And I was like, oh, okay, that makes me feel better.
And what did he mean by, at some point when you do it, you'll feel something different? I mean, is there some euphoria that he says you can get to by doing it?
It's he calls it, for himself, he calls it like a state of bliss. Yeah, a kind of a calmness. But he's not wrong. You have to practice it. You're never going to get it after just one try. You have to do it a minimum of twice a day to start to feel the benefits from it. It's like exercise, I suppose, in that way. I mean, any of the mindfulness practices are, you can't meditate, for an hour on the first Monday of every month and think that's going to help you for the entire rest of the month. It's something that you have to kind of keep up as a regular practice.
All right, well, this seems like less work than sweating when I exercise, so I think I'll do this instead. See if it changes my blood pressure.
Well, it's something that if you want to Google it some more, Harvard University is has written about it and saying how effective it is. I mean, it's a proven technique that he's offering for sure.
All right, I added it to my list.
Okay. And you can, I'm gonna wrap myself out. You can multitask that a little bit too. You can, so like, I'm supposed to use this sort of like eye wash thing from my doctor. And so I'm supposed to leave it there for a little bit. So I'm like, okay, I put it on, now I'll do my 4-7-8 breathing. Cause I'm just standing here anyway.
Catherine, I just wanted to speak to, hi, good information, great creative ideas too. There's what I'm going to use next week. But I wanted to say something about what you mentioned about how the students are really anxious and depressed. And, I've definitely noticed that this year. I wasn't teaching at St. Leo last year, but this year I just noticed this impact from the pandemic, right? And also it's not just that, but they seem hungry for a solution. Like for teaching English and for their writing, it definitely comes through with the ideas that they have to write about. But I wonder, have you thought about the opportunity for, and maybe you have because you're doing this for all teachers to teach mindfulness, but I wondered if you thought about the opportunity because they had that time in isolation and the discomfort that comes from it, because when someone's practicing at first, there's a lot of discomfort with yourself, right? Like one of the barriers is that sort of, listening to your mind and the thoughts that we have and everything. So it just seems like your timing is perfect to be there for them because they've had that experience from the pandemic, or most of them, right? From isolation. And then here you give a tool that also, there is a sense of isolation when you're practicing, right? But it's like something that will help solve what's come up for them. I don't know how to say it in a more concise way, but do you understand what I'm saying? Have you thought of that? With the
I've thought about what could I do? Could we make a mindfulness club? I mean, are people going to come to a mindfulness club? But no,
Yeah.
I agree with you 100%. I mean, I feel like I would definitely do more. I would be happy to do more. This was like a teeny tiny attempt on my part to do more.
Oh, no, I'm saying this is
yeah.
perfect timing. And I'm wondering if the timing of it is because you realized, that it's a great opportunity for them to have a practice, now, because they're experiencing those emotions.
It's just heightened. I mean, I guess from my perspective, I've been doing some of this stuff with them now for years because of the book. I just think a lot of them for a long period of time have been struggling a great deal with difficult emotions and an inability to cope with them. But now it's just at a crisis level.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you so much for the creative suggestions. Very helpful.
Thank you for being here. It's nice to see you.
It's great to see you.
Any other questions or comments? Anybody have anything on their mind they want to share?
I have one last question. Catherine, would you be willing to do this presentation for Faculty Development Day in the spring?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
We have a call for proposals out now, and I think it's such an important topic. And I think it's a topic a lot of faculty are interested in, and we kind of have a captive audience on Faculty Development Day. They're required to attend something. And so I'd love for a broader audience to hear this. I think it's really good stuff.
Oh, thank you, Candace. I really, really appreciate that. I mean, I would love to. That would be great. I would, I believe in all of this, I mean, I really do.
I'd like to say, when you were teaching that first Harry Potter course, we had a student in our department that was a student worker, work study worker. And that class was almost life-changing for her. She would come in every day before or after your class and have something to say about it, and how she just came alive in a way that no other class made her feel. And I knew it was something special then. I really wanted to be in the class, you know, and I think that we, you know, when you talked about sort of this systemic roadblocks that traditional education puts in place, we forget that there is a whole person sitting in front of us,
That's
not
right.
just a brain.
Yeah.
I love what Patrick said about, you know, he takes brain breaks with his students when he senses that they're stressed out. He does activities that help them to
Yeah.
cope with that. That kind of teaching is really unusual, and yet it's the sweet spot of teaching. It's where students feel recognized and valued, and it's just so much more than just academic. And I don't think a lot of faculty realize that if we don't address the non-academic, the academic doesn't happen.
Well, if it's okay to be this unprofessional, you've made me cry and gave me the chills. So thank you. I think one thing that has always been beneficial to me is comparing what our students do every day to when I go to a conference. And I like going to conferences, and I'm an academic, but there's only so much that I can soak up. After a while, I can't listen to another paper. I can't pay attention anymore, right? And that's what we're asking our students to do every single day, with the added weight of you're going to get evaluated for whether you do this well or not.
Yeah. Well, and I really appreciated your slides about, you know, how our brains are wired for survival, and that, you know, we think that anxiety is something no one should ever feel, but it's really something that we were designed to have. We just have to, it has to be productive. And, you know, when I did my sabbatical, I focused on cognitive science and brain-based learning, and we teach completely antithetical to how the brain learns.
Yeah.
We don't take into account those things, and how important brain breaks are, and how important tying learning to emotions are, how important it is to make it relevant and connected to their lives. And we have so much content that we want to deliver that we just dump. And we forget that that affective element is so powerful. And I appreciate you reminding us of that, because I sometimes forget it too, even though I cognitively know it.
Yeah.
We revalue that human element and even the physical element.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for being here and for your really great ideas. And yeah, I just really appreciate this opportunity, and appreciate each of you as well. Thank you.
Thank you for your willingness to present and for all the wonderful information. I'm going to stop the recording, and then Karen's got a short message to share with you.